Good morning, everyone. Naoki, for some reason, my slides are not showing up. Let me try one more time. And okay, I think that should work now. Are we on?
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Good morning for those that are in Hawaii, and good, afternoon or evening for those that are joining us from abroad. This is PICHTR's webinar on the implications of the American Jobs Plan on Hawaii's whole society approach to 100% clean energy and climate adaptation. My name is Veronica Rocha. I will be co-hosting this event with Naoki Nagai. We are both PICHTR advisors. And just as a heads up, this webinar is being recorded. To get us started, I would like to offer a couple of suggestions. The first one is the chat. If you can please use the chat for adding your comments, your reactions throughout the webinar, that would be great. And if you can use the Q&A for questions that you may have at any time during the webinar, that would be terrific. That way we can keep track of the two. Now, to get us started, I'm going to ask if you can please introduce yourself. So in the chat, please enter where are you calling from and how did you hear about this webinar? And I can tell we already have 88 participants, which is great. So we're going to give it a little bit more time for people to be able to enter into the chat. Where are they calling from and how did they hear about this webinar?
Yeah, the chat screen is found at the bottom of the screen. And then I see some people already writing in. Thank you. We have some attendee hearing about us from the mailing list, from Honolulu, Veronica's invitation, State Energy Office, the Haina Hawaii Department of Education, also heard from mailing list. Lots of people.
Wonderful. Okay, excellent, everyone. I see that the numbers keep going up on the number of participants, so that's excellent. Okay, now let's work on the Q&A. And if you can please enter into the Q&A, what questions are you hoping will be answered by today's discussion? Or another way to put it, what sort of questions do you have for the panelists? So let's check out the Q&A and see what sort of questions are coming in.
Yeah. So the Q&A is a different box that you can open from the bottom of the screen.
Okay, great. So questions came up from Howard Wig. Hi, Howard. I miss you, by the way. How to grow Hawaii's economy in a clean, green manner. And then what other questions are coming through, Naoki?
Yeah, then another one will be, what should we do to get more funds to come to Hawaii? Great question. And what federal funding would Hawaii be receiving? And how can we leverage to address the IAES situation? How can Hawaii best leverage Fed's dollars to ensure short and long-term solutions to resiliency and self-reliance in jobs, food, and energy? How will American Rescue Plan funding for Hawaii be allocated? Any funding to mitigate climate change?
Great, these are excellent questions. And good thing is that we actually changed the format of the webinar a little bit. So instead of Senator Brian Schatz, who will be joining us later, instead of him doing a keynote, we're actually going to do a Q&A with him. We'll start out by asking him a few questions that we have prepared, and then we're going to be taking questions from the audience. So please, please, please continue to input your questions into the Q&A and any comments or reactions that you may have on this webinar in the chat function. Before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsors, the Atherton Family Foundation, Hawaiian Electric, and the Consulate General of Japan in Honolulu. They are sponsoring PICHTR's Climate Adaptation Collective capacity building efforts, and today's webinar is part of those efforts. For today's discussion, the agenda is going to include brief introductions on PICHTR and its Climate Adaptation Collective initiative, the American Jobs Plan overview, which I will be providing, and then we're going to transition into a Q&A with Senator Brian Schatz. We will have him for about 15 minutes, and then we will go into 3 excellent panel presentations from key leaders across the state as well as county. Then we'll spend about the last 30 minutes or so of today's webinar Q&A, directly engaging with our panelists. Although we do have some prepared questions, we would prefer to ask your questions. So at any time, again, please enter your questions into the Q&A. A little bit about PICHTR. PICHTR is a nonprofit organization. It was established in 1985 with the mission to expand economic opportunities in Hawaii by promoting public-private partnerships and advancing sustainable development. PICHTR's latest project is the Climate Adaptation Collective. And this project proactively tackles barriers to climate change adaptation by providing capacity building and advocacy to decision makers and the general public to enable forward progress on the most critical climate change adaptation initiatives of our time. The Climate Adaptation Collective sees climate change as an opportunity for a more resilient and economically strong Hawaii. Today's webinar is part of our capacity building efforts to increase awareness and understanding of climate change adaptation challenges, solutions, and opportunities for Hawaii and abroad. Now, before I get into this overview of the American Jobs Plan, I would like to mention that I do not represent the White House. I am not a federal government employee. This is all information that I've been able to garner from public resources. We will be making this presentation along with other presentations in this recording available to everybody who registered for the event and on PICHTR's website, and you will be receiving an email about that once the information is available online. So now talking about the American Jobs Plan. The focus of the plan is on upgrading and repairing America's physical infrastructure, investing in manufacturing, research and development, and expanding long-term healthcare services. The beautiful thing about this plan is that it integrates climate change mitigation, clean energy in particular, and adaptation and resilience. It also targets 40% of the benefits of climate and clean infrastructure investments to disadvantaged communities. The plan involves a $2.65 trillion investments that are concentrated over the next 8 years, but the $2.65 trillion represents a 10-year time span. This American Jobs Plan would represent a $900 billion deficit in the American budget over a 10-year period, but then over a 15-year period, it would be neutral, and beyond it would be positive. To offset the budget deficit, President Biden is proposing to increase corporate tax rates, increase minimum tax rates on foreign income of US corporations, and impose a new corporate maximum tax, along with other changes that he is proposing. The American Jobs Plan has these high level provisions that together account for the $2.6 trillion investment. Transportation infrastructure would account for $621 billion. Domestic manufacturing, research and development, and job training initiatives, $590 billion. Expanding home care services and providing additional support for care workers, $400 billion. Clean energy tax credits alone would also be another $400 billion. And improving the housing stock modernizing schools and childcare facilities, and upgrading VA hospitals and federal buildings would be $328 billion. Now, investing in broadband, electrical grid, and clean drinking water would be $311 billion for a grand total. This is again over a 10-year span of $2.6 trillion. Here is the same budget, but broken down by percentages. So certainly the largest share would be in transportation and infrastructure at about approximately 23%, while domestic manufacturing, et cetera, would be at approximately 22%. The other two follow-on major categories would be the clean energy tax credits at 15%, as well as expanding home care services, et cetera, for 15% of the proposed budget. And then the other two categories are roughly 12% for improving the housing stock, et cetera, and investment in broadband and electrical infrastructure at 11.7%. Naoki, I know that we still have a few minutes before Senator Schatz is able to join us, but when he does, can you give me the heads up? That way I can wrap up and make sure we transition on time for his remarks. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, appreciate that. Okay, so now investment in transportation infrastructure, this was one of the categories that we just discussed. As you can see, it has many subcategories. I'm only going to touch on subcategories related to climate change, clean energy in particular, and climate adaptation or resilience. You can see that under the Invest in Transportation Infrastructure, $621 billion total, a big portion of that is proposed to go into investment in electric vehicles, including consumer rebates to purchase electric vehicles, grants and incentives to build 500,000 new charging stations and replacing and electrifying the federal vehicle fleet. Another significant investment is improving infrastructure resilience by safeguarding infrastructure and services, defending vulnerable communities, which is very important, and maximizing resilience of land and water resources at $50 billion. In terms of manufacturing, research and development and training, which as a category, the proposal is for $590 billion, it proposes to provide an additional funding of $50 billion to the National Science Foundation. And if you're familiar with this foundation, its research goes beyond one particular topic and more so across all of society. It also proposes a $46 billion investment to support clean energy manufacturing with federal procurement, and $35 billion to provide additional funding for climate change research and development. And of course, this is amongst various other subcategories under each one of the provisions. The clean energy tax credits, as we had discussed previously, would be approximately a $400 billion investment, and improving the housing stock, modernizing schools and childcare facilities, upgrading the VA hospital, federal buildings, et cetera. It would also include $126 billion to build over 1 million energy efficient housing units and eliminate certain zoning and land use policies, and $27 billion to establish clean energy and sustainability accelerators. Last but not least, in terms of investing in broadband, electrical grid, and clean drinking water, it proposes $311 billion total, as was noted before. Investing in power infrastructure would be approximately $100 billion, and upgrading and modernizing drinking water supplies through grants and low-cost flexible loans to states, tribes, territories, and disadvantaged communities at $56 billion. And last but not least, providing funding to monitor PFAS, which is, as I understand it, an acid that is bad for one's health, sometimes found in drinking water. So it would be investment towards monitoring PFAS, as well as investing in rural small water systems and household well and wastewater system, which are all very, very important. So with that, Naoki, has Senator Schatz been able to join us yet?
So he says he's in the waiting room.
Let me stop my share. Yeah, we don't have a waiting room unless, I wonder if he,
No, we don't have.
yeah, I wonder if he did not get the link. So can we take a quick pause here? And Naoki, I'm going to ask you to lead a quick discussion. And if you could please gather from this group, how do you see yourselves working toward clean energy and climate adaptation in Hawaii and or in the future? I'm going to try to communicate with Senator Schatz's office and see if we can get him to join us. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for now, and I will be back shortly.
Okay, sounds good. So Scott, Nicola, and Chair Case, maybe we'll use this opportunity to have a little bit of discussion while we wait. We invite Senator Schatz to the room. Yeah, so maybe we can do 30 seconds introduction maybe in the beginning.
Sure, I'll go ahead. I'm Suzanne Case. I'm the chair of the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources and the co-chair of the Hawaii Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission.
Thank you, Chair Case.
Aloha, everyone. My name is Scott Glenn. I'm the Chief Energy Officer for the state of Hawaii and Governor Ige's policy advisor for climate policy. Thank you.
And good morning, everybody. My name is Nicola Hedge. I am a Deputy Director with the City and County of Honolulu's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Oh, now we have Senator Schatz. Welcome.
Nice to see you all.
Thank you so much for being here, and apologize for that technical glitch that we just encountered. I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. And I must say, Senator Schatz, it's just such an honor to have the opportunity to introduce you. I moved to Hawaii about 10 years ago, and I've known about you and your work in supporting Hawaii's clean energy, sustainability, climate change in general from like day one. And it's just a pleasure to have somebody like you represent us in DC who is passionate about these issues. So thank you on behalf of PICHTR and everybody here today for joining us. So quick introduction to a man who is very well known, Senator Brian Schatz. He is Hawaii's senior United States Senator. He serves on the Senate Appropriations Committee, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, Select Committee on Ethics. He is our chair for the Senate Indian Affairs Committee and the Chief Deputy Whip of Senate Democratic Caucus. As you can tell, he is incredibly busy, and truly an honor to have you here with us today. So, Senator, to get us started, can you please talk to us about what could the American Jobs Plan mean for climate action and the growth of clean energy in Hawaii?
Well, I first of all, thank you for having me, and thanks to PICHTR and everybody who's on the panel, and Scott and Suzanne and Nicola and a number of other people. Just thank you for your good work and your important public service. To answer that question, the American Jobs Plan is a climate plan, and I have been impressed at the extent to which the Biden administration has taken seriously the proposition that climate action is going to have to be a whole, not just whole of government, but a whole of society enterprise. And so therefore, every single department, the Coast Guard, the Department of Defense, the State Department, the Department of Ag, everybody has to have a climate HUD, FEMA, they all have to have a climate action plan, not just to help to transform our economy to a 100% clean energy economy, but also to deal with climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So I'm thrilled that they get it, and they're getting it in ways that are, maybe a little boring, but governmentally super important, that it's not being siloed to Department of Interior, EPA, and US Department of Energy. It's really a whole of government approach. The truth, though, regarding the American Jobs Plan is we don't know what it's going to look like yet, because the best example of this phenomenon of the executive proposes and the legislative disposes is what happened with the American Rescue Plan, which I'm very proud of. But the fact is that as it was originally proposed, it was quite different from what we ended up enacting. And so although all of the stuff that Veronica, you read out about the possibilities of sort of buckets of money, tranches of money, lines of effort, that I think expresses a conceptual framework, but it's not actually what's going to be enacted as law necessarily. The best example from the American Rescue Plan is that the child tax credit, which was a really signature sort of foundational piece to the bill, wasn't in the original proposal. And so I think there's going to be a bunch of things that change over the next 6 to 8 weeks. On timing, it could either pass in mid-July or perhaps more likely in the September-October timeframe. And now we're just kind of wrangling on two levels. One is whether we can get 10 Republican votes to move something forward on a bipartisan basis. I think we should pursue that as aggressively as possible, but I think we should be clear-eyed that we may not be able to get much more than a handful of Republican votes, in which case we have to move forward on reconciliation and sort of negotiate among Democrats only on what that's going to look like. It will no doubt have some tax incentives and tax subsidies for clean energy. It will no doubt, in my view, have something on climate action in agriculture. I'm very confident about the electrification of transportation because the stars are aligning for that. I think the big variables are whether we do a national clean energy standard, which is sort of at least similar enough to our renewable portfolio standard to think of it that way, and or a carbon fee. I am in the camp of we should do all of those things because of the magnitude of the opportunity and the magnitude of the threat around climate change and the potential for climate action. And I'm trying to tell folks that, in 1998, 99, in the early 2000s, we were having these absurd arguments about whether we should do wind or solar or conservation. And we started to realize that we were in such a hole from the standpoint of our electricity portfolio that we should literally do all of the things, and that an argument about which of these things to do is preposterous. It's bad politics and it's bad policy. And so I'm trying to get people to kind of understand that, frankly, we're going to have to do all of these things. I really believe we're going to have to do environmental justice in a meaningful way. We're going to have to take care of what we're calling our energy veterans, people who work in fossil generation right now, but deserve a transition into these new economic opportunities. We're going to have to do conservation and efficiency. We're going to have to work in the international context. We literally have to do all of it. And the challenge with politics is the tyranny of the or, right? The assumption that you can only do one thing or the other. And when it comes to climate action, we're going to have to just try to enact as many of these policies in the same legislative vehicle as possible.
Thank you. And I completely agree with you. It seems overwhelming, but the truth of the matter is that, yeah, we have to do everything, including addressing the impacts of climate change, which we are feeling already in Hawaii and across the globe. So my next question for you, Senator, is how do you see the American Jobs Plan, should it become a bill or an act in the future, providing opportunities for investing in community resilience?
Well, I think there's sort of a couple of ways to look at this. First of all, we've already done a lot of really interesting things that are an example for the world in terms of clean energy deployment. And while we do have some pretty high-tech stuff, but we also have just experience in deployment and experience with the Hawaiian Electric Company of integrating clean energy into a grid sort of well beyond any thresholds that were considered viable 20 or 30 years ago. And so that experience is as important as the sort of pure research side, which gets people excited, carbon capture, algae, there's all kinds of cool stuff out there, but it's the deployment that's going to determine the extent of our progress. And we've probably done as well as any other place in figuring out how to move towards a smart grid, not just in concept, but in reality. How do we deal with energy storage challenges? How do we integrate clean energy into a grid where we basically have zero tolerance for poor energy quality, right? I mean, because we have Waikiki, because we're a major city, because the Pacific Command is located here in Pearl Harbor, there's just no tolerance for brownouts and blackouts. And so we had to do all of this while maintaining high power quality. And that is an incredibly powerful example for my mainland counterparts who are sort of stuck in the 70s and 80s saying, hey, the thing about wind is, and then they go into this analysis that is what I used to hear in 1998 and 1999. So that's number one. And I believe there's more money to be had on the federal side to kind of ramp up what we're already doing and to share it with the rest of the country and the rest of the planet. On community resilience, at the kind of more traditional infrastructure level, there's just going to have to be more money for climate adaptation, especially in the transportation side. This stuff is mundane, but essential. If you live in certain parts of Maui, if you live on the northeast side, the windward sort of north shore of Oahu, you're seeing it, in 3 dimensions. And as much as I like getting excited about all the transformational stuff we're going to do in the energy sector and in the fuel sector and in battery storage, if you're living in Ka'ava or if you have to drive to Lahaina for work, like you have more immediate concerns, which is that the highway is literally underwater some of the time. And so we're going to need money for infrastructure. I will say that's an area where the Biden proposal was a little light on dollar amounts. They had $8 billion. It's fair to say they had it everywhere, like everything is supposed to be climate adaptation, but they had a specific basket of money, which was only single-digit billions for climate adaptation in the transportation side, on the surface transportation side. And that's just, that doesn't even get you through our needs in the state of Hawaii, let alone the whole country. So that needs to be plussed up. As the chairman of the Transportation, Housing, Urban Development Subcommittee on Appropriations, we're working with the administration because I think they realize that either they weren't clear enough in calling out all the interesting spending opportunities here, or they just sort of left it behind and are leaving it for us to do. But one way or another, we'll remedy that.
I would love to see that, Senator. Frankly, a lot of the focus has been on climate action, reducing greenhouse gases, and for very, very, very good reasons. Our future generations and even our current generation depends on it. But the parallel path of addressing climate adaptation is also critically important. So I'm very happy to hear that that's something that you see and are actively trying to address. So now on the audience, Senator, we have people from private sector, academic sector, government at all levels, international folks, and not all of us are as well versed as you are on what it takes to go from this plan to an actual act. So I was hoping that, and you touched on it a little bit, I was hoping you could spend, maybe a minute or so just giving us a little bit more information on what are the steps this bill has to go through and what are its prospects for passing. And then,
okay, so
I'm sorry, then we're going to transition to Q&A from the audience. So I just want to encourage audience members to please enter your questions into the Q&A. Apologies. Go ahead, Senator.
So thank you. So as you all know, 60 votes are required for the passage of major legislation in the United States Senate. There's one exception to that rule, which is that when you're doing a budget bill, that requires 51. So we prefer to do it with 60 votes. And we're in the process, I think the next month or so will determine whether or not we're going to be able to do this with Republican participation. If we do, that's great. But if we cannot, and I think frankly that's slightly more likely, then we need to move forward. But then we end up being a little more constrained in terms of the kinds of things we can do. Everything has to have a budget impact, and there are aspects of climate action that cannot be captured by the reconciliation process. And that's the quickest way I can say it. But we can still get most of climate action done through reconciliation. Of the 2 or 3 or 4 things that I think are most essential for this country, climate is probably the most that fits most nicely under reconciliation. The other stuff like criminal justice reform or immigration reform, it's going to be very hard to put it into a budget bill. Climate action is sort of about turning dials on subsidies and regulatory dials, and that is permissible through the reconciliation process. So what does that mean? That means that over the next 4 weeks, we negotiate with Republicans simultaneously with negotiating with our Democratic colleagues to try to figure out what the basic framework is. Now, the good news is that a lot of these pieces are modular. Think of them as like the investment tax credit for solar and wind, or conservation and efficiency, or a bill on climate smart agriculture. All of those pieces are already written. And so the hard part is the making of the choices, but most of the pieces of legislation just are ready to roll. And so then we'd be able to move pretty quick once we make our choices. That's as quick of a summary as I can give you.
Thank you. That's excellent. That's, summarizing a very complicated process into a minute or so. Naoki, I'd like to turn it over to you. We can start out with one question from the audience and go from there. We have about 2.5 minutes left with the senator.
Okay, so there's Senator, there's one question from the audience. How can the American Jobs Plan help prepare Hawaii's workforce for jobs in the clean energy industry? It's about jobs.
I don't want to give you a sort of glib answer. I hadn't thought of that. I do think there may be some difficulties with reconciliation and doing workforce initiatives, because we might have to do a new authorizing bill. So I don't want to promise that we can address the workforce challenge in the American Jobs Plan, but that's something I'll take back under advisement and check with my staff on, because it's a smart question. Any one of these things could be a materials thing. It could certainly be a NIMBY thing, but there are any number of ways for us to slow down the deployment of clean energy and slow down our progress. But it also could be a labor shortage. We got to work all of these angles, and I'll follow up.
Thank
Great.
you.
One more question, Naoki, from the
One more
audience.
question. Okay, yeah. So what funding is specifically targeted for Hawaiian communities?
For Hawaiian communities. So in the American Jobs Plan, that remains to be seen, but I will tell you that in the American Rescue Plan, we worked very hard to make sure that not just Hawaii, but Hawaiians in particular got their fair share, whether it was Native Hawaiian education, healthcare, language, tourism, housing. We got more than $200 million in total for Native Hawaiian organizations and Native Hawaiian serving institutions. And so we'll take that approach again with the American Jobs Plan.
Senator, thank you so much for your time today. In the remaining 30 seconds that we have with you, or however long you want to take, frankly, are there any parting words that you would like to express to this crowd?
No, I just really appreciate the work that you do. And I think many of you know my great staff, and please don't hesitate to reach out if there are any favors that we can give, large or small. We're in the process of trying to pass major legislation, but we're also in the process collectively of trying to implement the American Rescue Plan Act, and that takes a ton of work too. So whatever you need, just let us know.
Thank you, Senator. We so appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. We'll certainly take you up on your offer to reach out to your staff. I've had very positive experience with all of them. So with that, thank you so much. And we wish you a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks
Aloha.
a lot.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that segment with Senator Schatz. And for those that have joined a little bit late, Today we're talking about the implications of the American Jobs Plan and Hawaii's whole society approach to 100% clean energy and climate adaptation. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our panelists. Naoki, thank you so much for prompting the panelists to start to introduce themselves. For the benefit of those that just joined, I'd like to take just a minute or so to introduce each one of the panelists. Then I'm going to turn it over, starting with Suzanne Case, Chair Suzanne Case, I should say, followed by Scott Glenn and Nicola Hedge, to each provide 10 minutes of remarks, and then we will do about half an hour of Q&A, some prepared questions, but hopefully we'll be addressing most of the questions from the audience. So please input your questions into the Q&A that you may have for any one of the panelists today. So with that, I would like to introduce Chair Suzanne Case. She is the chair of the state of Hawaii's Department of Land and Natural Resources, where she oversees 11 divisions with a staff of 1,000 and a budget of $159 million, covering Hawaii's forestry and wildlife, freshwater, conservation and coastal regulation, aquatic resources, state parks, historic preservation, etc. As you can tell, she has a ginormous job to do here in Hawaii. She is also the co-chair of the Hawaii Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission, and also serves as co-chair for the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. So welcome, Chair Case. Next, I would like to introduce Scott Glenn, who is the Chief Energy Officer for the state of Hawaii, where he is responsible for the overall fulfillment of the Energy Office's mission to promote energy efficiency, renewable energy, and clean transportation to help achieve a resilient, clean energy, decarbonized economy. As the Chief Energy Officer, Scott also serves as Governor Ige's representative to the UN Conference of Parties, Climate Negotiations, the Under 2 Coalition, the U.S. Climate Alliance, and other institutions to advance Hawaii's climate, energy, and clean energy goals. Next, I would like to introduce you to Nicola Hedge, who I recently had the pleasure of meeting. She serves as the Deputy Director for the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency for the City and County of Honolulu. Nicola has more than a decade of experience working with local governments on climate action, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, and resilience policy. And since 2021, she has served as the Deputy Director for the City and County of Honolulu's Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resilience Office. Before that, she served as, before she joined the city, she was part of the city's competitive war for the Bloomberg Philanthropies American Cities Climate Change to accelerate greenhouse gas emissions reductions from the building and transportation sector. So wealth of information and expertise with Nicola, Scott, and Suzanne. So to get us started, I'm going to stop share and I'm going to ask Chair Case to please offer remarks. Chair, as I mentioned earlier, everybody has 10 minutes to present. At approximately 9 minutes, I will ask everybody to wrap up. So thank you so much for being here, and please move forward.
Thank you very much, Veronica and Naoki, for your work on this. Really appreciate Senator Schatz taking the time to address these issues with us and all of his work and the work of the delegation on the American Jobs Act and all of these bills that benefit Hawaii and the world, the nation, and particularly with regard to climate change. And I do want to thank everyone for being here today, because this is all of our issue, and we need everyone's brains and efforts to solve this climate challenge right now. And today, particularly, we're talking about the intersection of the proposed American Jobs Plan for infrastructure and jobs creation and climate change, and a commitment to involving the whole of government and indeed the whole of society in this complex problem. And that's really about solving complex problems through joint action, joint activities and coordination, and not just, a few siloed departments are responsible for this. And the Hawaii Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission is actually a direct example of this whole of government approach by the very way it's set up. It is set up to be cross-departmental. The question was before, who's responsible in government for tackling this climate change challenge? And the answer is, and needs to be, all of us. The Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission has a mission to promote ambitious, climate neutral, and now working toward climate positive and carbon negative, culturally responsive strategies for climate change mitigation and adaptation in a manner that is clean, equitable, and resilient. The commission consists of a multi-jurisdictional effort among 20 different departments, committees, and the counties. It's co-chaired by the chair of the Department of Land and Natural Resources and the director of the State Office of Planning. It includes the chairs of the relevant committees in the House and Senate. So that's the Water and Land Committees, the Energy and Environment Committees. It also includes Department of Business and Economic Development and Tourism, the Hawaii Tourism Authority, the Department of Agriculture, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, the Department of Transportation, Department of Health, Department of Education, and all of the counties, Kauai, Honolulu, Maui, and Hawaii counties, the Adjutant General, and the Coastal Zone Management program. So it's by nature connecting us all, and really hearing everyone's perspectives and getting to know, each department and their work on this really facilitates joint solutions to these complex problems. And Scott and Nicola and I are all active in these issues, and our organizations are members of the Climate Commission. And so we're talking today roughly from two sides of that climate challenge coin, mitigation and adaptation, how we can get off of fossil fuels as quickly as possible and help Hawaii adjust to new conditions. So even these, though, are cross-jurisdictional because, for example, to implement energy projects where they have a state nexus, although they're not our DLNR projects, we have to ensure compliance with state environmental and historic preservation laws as they intersect with our kuleana. And so the American Jobs Plan essentially rethinks the American approach to infrastructure building and job creation by focusing especially on infrastructure that will address climate change through a focus on a cleaner and more resilient and equitable and just future. So as this unfolds, and we're all watching it and hoping for a great result, and appreciate again all of the efforts of the Senator and our delegation on this matter. I'm just going to provide a few examples to get our conversation started on work that we at the Department of Land and Natural Resources are doing that's cross-jurisdictional and solving these complex problems from different angles. So first example would be our beaches, Hawaii's iconic beaches, and they are being affected by sea level rise. They're in some cases narrowing, and sand is washing away when we have extreme tides and storm surges. And so the DLNR Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands and the Waikiki Business Association and DLNR with legislative support just partnered in a beach nourishment project to bring back the sand that had washed out from Waikiki Beach, to bring it back in onto the beach. That project was just completed. And so if you go down to Waikiki right now, you've got a whole fresh swath of sand to enjoy. We, as mentioned previously by the Senator, sea level rise is already inundating our coastal roads. Our coastal roads are right along the coast in some instances, right next to the water. and with housing on the Mauka, or the inland side of the road. And where the sea level rise and storm surges and storm tides are coming up to the beach, it's right next to the highway, and in some cases across the highway at times. And so we've had monk seals haul out to rest adjacent and even on the highways where that happens. We have Ivikupuna exposed as sand washes away under the edges of the coastal highways. And so we're working with Hawaii Department of Transportation and the State Historic Preservation Division of DLNR and the Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands to try to partner in temporary solutions to stabilize the sand, while we're planning for projects that may be able to encourage passive beach renewal where possible, or road realignment, moving the road inland where it's necessary and possible. And there are already several examples of this, particularly along the south shore of Maui. And then we also want to credit the Hawaii Department of Transportation, particularly Ed Sniffen at DOT Highways, who led a cross-jurisdictional procurement of electric vehicle leases to convert our state fleets more quickly off of fossil fuels. And that is in implementation now. Another example is the intensive localized storms we've been experiencing with these heavy rain bombs. And they have washed out our ancient awai in some places, the irrigation ditches, moving water from the streams to grow taro. And they also have threatened, the volume of water has threatened to overtop old earthen dams. So our DLNR divisions, Land Division and the Water Commission and the engineering divisions have partnered with these taro farmers on permitting to rebuild the diversions and the ditches. And we've also stepped up dam safety enforcement to try to deal with safety issues from the old earthen dams that are aggravated by heavy rainstorms. We have hundreds of thousands of acres of Hawaiian rainforest that have been lost to land use conversion over time, including grazing and digging by hooved animals. So we've partnered with the AmeriCorps program through Kupu and others to implement a green jobs program. And our goal is to hire unemployed workers to plant trees in our most important areas adjacent to native forests. And there's some funding from the American Rescue Plan allocated by the legislature. It's in review by the Department of Budget and Finance. And that's to accomplish just this kind of jobs repurposing while we're reforesting our lands. And then one last example, the temperature increases we've experienced globally have moved warm weather up our mountains, and they bring mosquitoes that carry avian malaria and avian pox upland in a reduced area of our last remaining refuges for our endangered forest birds. And we are just in a race against time to save our kiwikiu, the Maui parrotbill, and the Kauai akikiki and akeke'e from extinction, perhaps in the next couple of years. It's very scary. So we're working, again, cross-jurisdictional with the National Park Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the universities of Hawaii and Michigan State and Kentucky, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, EPA, and NGOs, such as the Nature Conservancy and American Bird Conservancy, and many others, with a goal to introduce naturally sterile mosquitoes through naturally occurring Wolbachia bacteria to our forest to counter these diseases that are carried by mosquitoes, and try to solve this at a landscape scale. So I'll pause with that. These are some examples of the whole of government approach to solving climate mitigation and adaptation challenges in Hawaii. And so in sum, I just want to say that the question we all ask, I always ask myself, and I ask you all to ask is, what can I do? What's everything I can do to solve climate change I can do? And how can I better coordinate with others where our responsibilities overlap? Thank you.
Aloha, Chair Case. Thank you very much for your remarks and for having this whole society approach to dealing with climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. So thank you very much for all of your work. Next, I would like to turn it over to Scott Glenn to offer his remarks. Thank you, Scott.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Chair, for starting off with such great comments. Hopefully everyone can see the slides I have up. Before getting into the American Jobs Plan discussion, I'd like to share a little bit of background with folks and some context about Hawaii so that we're all kind of working from the same set of facts and perspective. One thing to note is that today's meeting is brought to all of us by oil from Libya and Russia and coal from Indonesia, brought here in regular barge shipments across the ocean, powered by burning oil. So even if you are joining this call and participating today from your home with rooftop energy, maybe you have a home battery, maybe you drive an EV, you're still relying on this through the connecting infrastructure, as well as everything we depend on in our daily life, from our hospitals to the data centers that process our online meeting, to the grocery stores and our other stops in life. All of this depends on the oil and coal that we currently bring here to the state. And in return, we send out about $3 billion to these countries and to fossil fuel companies every year, exporting our greenhouse gas emissions, exporting our land use, and creating jobs and economic development in other places while fueling global warming and causing the impacts that Suzanne just highlighted. As a small state in the Pacific, in the middle of the ocean, we are dependent on the rest of the world for our way of life. Our energy, our food, our economy, in the form of tourists, come to Hawaii every year on jet fuel and bunker fuel. And as we're having intense discussions across the islands about what kind of life we want, we're asking ourselves, how self-sufficient can we be? How do we hukilike to be more self-sufficient? And how do we have a more circular economy? How do we become more resilient? So I'm going to focus in a little bit on the energy aspects of this and start off with a picture of the archipelago to look at the 6 major islands to show where are we on our renewable energy pathway. In the bottom, you can see that state of Hawaii, our population, we have 6 standalone grids. And so almost anything that the continent is doing is going to be harder here because we don't have anyone to rely on. We have to rely on ourselves, and each island for energy, for its grid, has to rely on itself because we don't have cables connecting them and we don't have ways to ship energy between the islands. We might in the future with hydrogen, but currently we don't. Just to note that Kauai has its own utility, and it's the furthest along at about 67% for its renewable portfolio standard, which means it's almost at its 2040 target. And it has several projects in the works right now that would take it to 80%. And Kauai routinely runs on 100% renewable energy for 5 to 8 hours of the day. The rest of the islands are under Hawaiian Electric service territory. And as you can see, they all have different mixes of population numbers, peak capacity for the grid, and the renewable energy resources they rely on. For perspective, if you look at Lanai and Molokai, their grid capacity is smaller than individual projects that are being installed on Oahu, Maui, and Hawaii. And you can see the electricity price also ranges. These are the average residential rates. And one of the biggest driving factors in this price is oil and the fluctuating price of oil on the global market. And so as we transition to renewable energy generated here in the islands, we're able to start getting more consistency in our electricity prices and reducing exposure to the global market and the price of oil. And so this is the archipelago-wide perspective. But next, I'd like to focus in on one particular effort underway to help us think about how the American Jobs Act can touch everything, and that's retiring the coal plant. For several years now as a state, we've been discussing and planning for this retirement. Last year, Hawaii passed Act 23, which established that coal-fired power generation would not be permitted beyond the retirement of this plant in 2022. In 18 months, we are planning to retire this plant. It's a tremendous turning point. It's 180 megawatts, which provides about 16% of the island's energy, of Oahu's energy. And it's a significant amount of firm capacity. And we're doing something that's almost unheard of. We're replacing it with renewable energy, not natural gas, not combined cycle plants or other things, but mostly solar plus battery. And we are currently looking at 9 solar plus battery projects and 1 grid connected battery to be this, as well as other solutions like distributed energy resources and energy efficiency. All of the effort that goes into building these 9 projects and turning this coal plant off requires significant coordination, planning, modeling, permitting, land use, procurement, construction, and ultimately turning it on in a way that makes sure that we don't have rolling blackouts. And this requires so much coordination that Governor Ige has convened a task force to help with this coordination. And extrapolating from this one project that we're trying to turn off in 18 months, for Oahu, we have to retire or convert about 15 fossil fuel plants in about 24 years, or that's to say about 1 every 1.5 years. And with the president's announced goal of pollution-free power by 2035, then we're looking at possibly having to retire 1 plant each year. So that's to help us think about, how much effort it goes into actually implementing on the ground this kind of discussion. And when we're talking about what we're replacing the coal plant and fossil fuel plants with, this is a photo of a solar project on Oahu to give you a sense of the scale of what we're looking at. And some of the solar plus battery projects that we're looking at now to replace just the coal plant are 4 times the size of this project. So what we're really talking about is bringing home our energy footprint that right now we're putting on Libya, Russia, and other places around the world to carry part of our energy burden. And we're asking ourselves, how much of our land and resources do we allocate to energy? The construction of these projects also requires a skilled workforce. We need people, electricians, roofers, all kinds of skilled technologies. And we saw during the ARA recovery around 2009 that when rooftop solar led the way to our recovery, and it accounted for almost 1/4 of all construction dollars at that point. It also meant that we had workers flown over from California to fill the jobs because we didn't have enough workers to install all of that solar. And so as we think about big crushes of money coming out of Congress in the billions and billions of dollars, that we need to be ready to have the workers. And if California is also doing this and other states are also doing this, what kind of worker shortage will we have? Which was a question that was brought up with Senator Schatz. More locally too, it also means we have to think about the use of our land, how much of it goes to housing, how much of it goes to food, how much to open space. Each island has a different mix of needs and available land, and how much will each island be self-sufficient for which priorities, and how much do we rely on each other to help us out? At the Energy Office, we've been starting to work on this question. And one of the things, what you're looking at here is an image from our tool that we've been developing in-house called Haven, or Hawaii Advanced Visualization Energy Nexus. And what this is showing is a model of what a potential build out could look like for one of Hawaiian Electric's 100% renewable scenarios in 2045. And so what this is showing you is in this white crosshatch, potential good solar land, and the orange is how much might need to be allocated to solar panels just to meet about 40% of our PV need for the 100% goal. And this is taking into account rooftops being covered, 100 residential roofs, all residential roofs being covered in Hawaii, and some portion of commercial rooftops being covered with rooftop solar, which is what the DER that you're looking at for 37% represents. Now, also to keep in mind, what this does not show is the conversion of our ground transportation to the electricity sector. So as we're pursuing more EVs, we're going to be needing to create more generation to power those EVs as we're switching from gasoline to electricity. And even just around the corner is the potential for inter-island electric flights, inter-island electric shipping, in which case even more generation will be needed, further exacerbating this discussion about land use. So what does this all mean? I think for us, as we're engaging and preparing for any type of variation of the American Jobs Act, which Senator Schatz noted will most likely go through a lot of permutations through Congress. Like any transition from old to new here in Hawaii, a careful and deliberate approach is needed to ensure a smooth transition, while also timely moving funds out the door, getting programs running, and getting projects built. Hawaii has reinvented our economy before and the energy it relies on. We had sandalwood, whale oil, sugar, coal, and now we're moving to a portfolio of renewable energy. And in moving to that, the first step, of course, is energy efficiency. We want to reduce waste, avoid unnecessary energy use, and being more efficient with the energy we do use, whether that's in our homes, our businesses, or in our land use, by moving to more walkable communities that don't require as much driving, so that we don't have to use gasoline or electricity to move around. All of these help us with our renewable energy goals. And it becomes even more important as we look at the regeneration at the generation we need to do. So as we've been at the State Energy Office engaging the federal government on the American Jobs Act, we've been making a number of recommendations through through federal agencies, through national organizations like the National Association of State Energy Offices, and in direct meetings with congressional committees, is that we've been recommending to learn the lessons from ARA, from the CARES Act, and from ARPA in terms of implementation, having clear guidelines, clear uses of the funds, planning for long-term support of the goal. If we're aiming for 2045 or 2035, as the president has said, we need certainty around the availability of tax rebates, incentives for the duration of that project, because even 1 or 2 years of uncertainty of the rebate or the incentive going up or down means that residents, homeowners will put off switching to solar or buying an EV. Businesses will put off putting investments in their business for renewable energy. Project developers will put even more pressure on communities and agencies to get projects built so that they can make sure that they lock in that tax credit. All of that creates unnecessary pressure with this uncertainty. But if there's a way to have that certainty built in for the duration of the goal, it helps everyone. We also recommended using existing funding flows. So things like the State Energy Program, the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, Highway Improvement Program, all of these are tried and true federal funding mechanisms to move federal money to states and local governments and private entities quickly and get them deployed, and all of them help with our renewable energy goals. We also are recommending projects that scale and programs that scale, because it's very hard to do onesie twosie types things, and utility scale development, for example, requires a lot of focused effort, whereas things like rooftop, distributed energy generation, EV rebates, things like that have minimal overhead for agencies and government to implement, and it helps get money out the door faster to more people. But we can't neglect that we do need the utility scale. And Veronica, I'm wrapping up, so I know I'm getting time. Is that we need to make sure that we do have funds available for government to be able to implement these programs. So administrative overhead funds, dedicated staffing, all of this is important, because agencies like DLNR, DPP are already have tremendous number of projects they have to review. And if we want them to prioritize clean energy, it becomes even harder. And then lastly, I just want to emphasize this point about equity and engaging communities, disadvantaged communities. We have to figure out how to involve communities in decision-making in a way that is meaningful and still also timely deploying projects if we're going to meet these kinds of deadlines. And we also have to make sure that the president's 40% of benefits target doesn't become just an excuse for increasing or continuing the energy burden of already disadvantaged communities, and that we're making sure meaningful benefits flow to these communities as well. As Senator Schatz noted, and just to wrap up, Hawaii is ahead of the curve for many parts of the country, and our colleagues are looking to us. How we work together as an island, as islands, and as Hawaii will help both our goals and the rest of the country figure out how they're going to move forward. So Veronica, thank you very much, and apologies for going over time.
Thank you, Scott. Great presentation. I really appreciate your remarks. I would like to now turn it over to Nicola Hedge. And before I do, I will say that we're a little bit behind schedule. So that's not to pressure you, Nicola, you still have 10 minutes. It's more to prepare everyone that after Nicola's remarks, I like to go to questions from the audience and cover as many of them as possible in a rapid round of Q&A. So Nicola, please.
Great. Well, thank you. I hope you can see my screen here. I just had a few brief slides. My name again, Nicola Hedge. I am super excited to be here and really want to thank PICHTR and everybody for joining, and the previous speakers for your leadership on these issues, and also just the opportunity to continue to link arms as we so need to as we move forward. Especially at this time when, you know, the federal government is prioritizing climate action, and as we've heard, equity as perhaps never before. Personally, I'm also happy to be here. I'm about 3 months on this job. I've served with the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency for almost 2 years now. And was really excited at the opportunity to step up and build on a lot of the hard work that has happened with the team and office to date, working collaboratively with city departments and across different levels of government. We know that while there are significant investments at play for this work, you know, our needs are really great. Our needs across the country. There's a lot of pain in the community across issues from the impact of the pandemic. And we know that there's a lot to balance. So we can't appreciate enough Chair Case, Scott's team, Senator Schatz, and the rest of the delegation really reaching out and continuing to think how we can work even more effectively together with more potentially, but always, you know, limited resources in terms of time, money, and bandwidth. But we know that we also have, you know, unlimited innovation and leadership with community that we want to continue to harness. Just a little bit about our office. We're created with a vote of the community with an amendment to the city charter in 2016. So we're relatively new. We have a fairly broad set of marching orders from the community around the items that you can see here. And then more clarity or definition was also brought with the city council passing ordinance 2047 at the end of last year, really solidifying the role of our office to help, you know, facilitate, coordinate, collaborate across city departments around issues of energy, coastal and water, equity and climate resilience, food security, waste, hazard mitigation, long-term disaster recovery, and especially issues about One Water and having a more holistic approach to some of our water issues. So there's a lot that we're working on. It's not intended to be by us. You know, it's really with us in partnership with other city departments and levels of government and community. For some reason, oh, there we go. So we have, you've heard from Chair Case and from Scott, and we see, right, the impacts of climate change every day around around flooding, coastal erosion, rain bombs, you know, increasing heat. This is not a future issue, it's here and now, and communities are struggling, and we also and paying for, you know, these impacts of climate change, as is the city, to address and follow up. And we really want to more holistically get our arms around some of these impacts and priority actions. And so our office currently is leading a Climate Ready Oahu effort intended to solidify an island-wide risk assessment, you know, evaluating climate impacts on important infrastructure, and particularly with frontline communities. We want to identify priority actions to address some of those and make recommendations, not only for practical actions, but then also integrating this into our ongoing decision-making. This is not a one and done kind of effort. We really hope this is rooted in community voices like yours. We have some sessions coming up just this very week. We'll continue to really lean on the lived experience of community and where we see there some of the greatest needs. So please do check out climatereadyoahu.org if you're interested and have not yet. We also know that adaptation and how we address these impacts will require us to think differently about infrastructure. And as I'm excited to see the rescue plan and the Jobs Act continue to call out more holistic look at green infrastructure and its role also in some of the solutions that we see moving forward. Historically, we've also seen that the federal government provides a lot of resources after events, which is hugely important after extreme events that we continue to see more of here in Hawaii. But this is not sustainable, as we continue to see more, billion-dollar events becoming more common. And so we're really trying from Honolulu's perspective to also get ahead, seek more proactive mitigation resources. So we've been fortunate with our first ever hazard mitigation and long-term disaster recovery manager to help lead and apply for more than 4 times the FEMA hazard mitigation and risk reduction funding than any previous year to really try to put forth good project ideas and make sure that Honolulu and Oahu really benefits from the federal funding that is offered. We've seen new or FEMA funding programs like building resilient infrastructure and communities announce that they're doubling funding again this year. And we do see a huge role for us here in Honolulu to continue to put forth projects, work with departments, with community to identify how we can make sure Honolulu is in the queue for these. Flipping more to, in the interest of time, to not just these impacts of climate change and how we're going to see that, but along the lines of what Scott had shared as well around our collective contributions to climate change and the root causes of climate. We are but small islands, yet what we do here does matter. You may have seen Mayor Blangiardi release the final draft of the City and County of Honolulu's first ever strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the energy, transportation, and waste sectors. We're really excited. It's literally at council right now for final adoption on their end. And it's really offers again, I think a comprehensive strategy is based on more than 2 years of outreach across sectors and focused on where the city has the most influence. We've heard and seen, a lot of what the federal government, the state government can and is doing, which is so necessary. But we know we have an important role at the city and county working with community to reduce emissions. I do want to. My PowerPoint may not have worked, but if it doesn't move forward, that's okay. We'll stay. I'll just speak from the heart here. There are 9 strategies in the climate action plan, particularly again around transportation, around electricity, and around waste. We know there's other ways, particularly around land and agriculture and sequestration, that will play a significant role. But we wanted to start there where, at the local level, we have a huge opportunity. And, we want to continue to work in areas where there's cost-effective measures that we know just make good sense, but then also ways that we can continue to reduce emissions and also, improve lives of community, whether that's more safe, convenient options for people to have alternatives to the car, to their automobile, and feel safe and like they can access, other ways. We continue to incentivize affordable housing around, transit transit first. We want to continue to see how we can play our part in state efforts like Powering Past Coal. You know, the mayor, my boss, Matt Gonzer, the director of our office, and the head of DPP are at that table Powering Past Coal to continue to make sure that the city is doing our part. And we really want to, what I think is really important, that we can continue to help incentivize and find programs and prioritize efforts to not just make sure that the electric vehicles, the energy that we use is renewable, but how do we get more people having car-free lives, because we've really made that more possible at the local level? How do we make sure that people aren't needing to build more solar, more utility scale? We know that's going to be necessary, but how do we lighten that load even somewhat on our island, because we've done everything we can around energy efficiency? You know, at the city, we continue to make sure we're leading by example. We've started some energy service performance contracts. We were working on tens of buildings across the island. It's an effort that's creating some 320 jobs. It's reducing energy waste at city facilities so that we can put more money back into government services. We'll continue to leverage that funding and continue to find ways that we can put to work the funding that is entrusted in the city and county of Honolulu, whether it's around the pandemic and our response, but look for these synergies so we can address these dual crises. And I'll stop there and look forward to the Q&A and discussion.
Thank you, Nicola. I really appreciate your comments. So now we're going to move into a lightning round of Q&A, and this is how it's going to go. I will ask the first question. I'm going to ask the panelists to be very, very brief in their responses, but you know, be able to answer the question fully. And we're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. Ideally, if the question can be responded by one, maybe two of the panelists, and then we'll go on to the next question. So we've gotten several questions related to the electrification of transportation. So one question that we obtained was, what are the plans regarding the electrification of public transit buses and school buses? How can this transition be accelerated? I'm going to suggest that one of the things that the speaker also addresses is the e-bus pilot that I believe was just recently approved by the commission. So who would like to answer this question?
Take an initial stab, and then maybe Scott, you can talk about that, the e-bus pilot. But I know certainly within the county, given we do, you know, manage the fleet of buses, not so much school buses, but electrification, you know, is something we have committed to. You know, we are looking at working towards a fully electrified fleet by 2035, or renewably powered fleet. And so we're actively working towards that. Our Department of Transportation Services has been successful in securing a number of grants. You may have seen the first of that electric bus fleet out on the island. If not, take a look at it. Take a look out for it. And we'll continue to see, I think, another 14 or more buses arrive on island. That said, we're in the beginning of the transition. We're clear-eyed. It's going to take some resources. It's going to take being smart about leveraging different funding opportunities to get to the full fleet of 500 plus buses, especially for a community where we do have some of the oldest and so far longest serving bus fleet and well-loved bus service that we want to continue to transform.
Great, thank you, Scott.
Yes, and we're a ready partner with the city and the other 3 counties on this. As the State Energy Office, we have the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust Settlement, which is the penalty money that Volkswagen was required to pay for lying about their diesel emissions. So we have a portion of that money that we allocate that we've been allocated. And we've been working with the city and the counties on developing programs that can help with deploying that. So we're using that money. It's about $8 million plus. We're working with the Department of Health to combine that with Diesel Emissions Reduction Act money to further increase the pot to help further subsidize this bus switchover. So that's definitely something we've been working on. We'll continue to work on.
Great. Naoki, you ready for your next question?
Yeah, okay. So maybe this one's a little overarching, so maybe more starting with the chair case. So combine two questions. How can Hawaii best leverage federal funding to ensure short and long-term solution to resiliency and self-reliance in jobs, food, and energy? And maybe I'll combine to the next one. How would American Job Act funding for Hawaii be allocated?
Yeah, so I mean, leveraging is a great opportunity, particularly when there's matching funds available from the state and the counties, and in some cases, private entities. So, you know, you want to stretch your dollars as far as possible and make yourself as eligible as possible by looking to. We have some great funding sources that the legislature and the city councils county councils have provided, and so that's one excellent way to leverage it. And the other, you know, another is just to ensure that we have again the cross jurisdictional approaches, because then you've got you know, agencies working together on similar problem solving and can pool resources to make these projects happen.
Great. Next question.
Yeah, next question. Yeah. Yeah, so
go
the
ahead, Naoki.
Yeah, so the next question, so the audience would like to have current information on the total amount of greenhouse gases that Hawaii is emitting each year. This is towards how to track to meet the 50% reduction by 2030 and 100% by 2045.
Sure, the Department of Health Clean Air Branch does a greenhouse gas inventory for the state. And each of the counties have also been doing their own inventory to track their emissions. The method that we use for it is the international method with the EPA, aligned with EPA, and then some customization to Hawaii's specific environment. But right now, the inventory is for year 2017. And so what the Department of Health has been doing is moving forward in time, updating the method every year to further refine it and improve it. So right now, we have about 20 million metric tons of emissions, and about 40% of that is from energy generation, 40% of it is from energy transportation, and then the remainder is from other sources of emissions.
Thank you. Here's a question that I'd like to ask. What can government agencies do to ensure that renewable energy economy brings local jobs and benefits the local economy?
Maybe I'll take a quick stab. So first, I think it's working with our unions in our schools and our colleges and the different technology developers to identify what are the skills they need that they can't source or that need to be supplied by local labor, and making sure our local residents have those skills. So we've started doing that at the Energy Office, surveying workforce development needs to start doing that skill matching for battery technology, EVs, other types of emerging technology that we can then work with the community colleges and our schools to get kids those skills.
Okay. Next question, Naoki.
Yep. So the audience question is about whole society approach. How would it be implemented to empower communities and community organizations to participate and initiate positive actions?
I actually would like to add to that question and ask, how do panelists envision incorporating equity in Hawaii's implementation and planning for climate change mitigation? So whole society approach plus equity. Who would like to take that one?
Well, I spoke a little bit about the whole society approach and how it needs coordination. It needs involvement of everyone. it needs to relate it to the first part of the question, really to lead by example. So for example, with equity approaches, you want to make sure that any decision you have, you've considered the impacts on all communities, particularly vulnerable communities that may not have the same access to resources, may be further impacted, may need some special services, assistance with transportation, different transportation opportunities, or funding payback mechanisms if we do tax, for example, taxes on fossil fuel, to make them to make sure that the results are equitable across communities. And we also want to lead by example. For example, many people know that I'm working to try to convert the DLNR fleet of vehicles. We are desperately waiting for good electric vehicle off-road vehicles, trucks. They're just now coming out, so I've got my eye on them. But if we can't do it ourselves, how do we expect everyone else to do it? So we have to tackle those problems, each of us, and try to lead by example.
Just to add, we, certainly this is squarely a dual focus for us at the county and working with our state and federal partners. We are, one thing that we really try to do more of at the Resilience Office and in Honolulu is listen to community, continue to have open feedback loops and opportunities for engagement. We have a climate resilience and equity program that we've been fortunate to start up through our office, and they right now have some community kuka sessions, really listening and actively reaching out to community-based organizations to understand some of the challenges community are facing at this very unique time, and in an ongoing way. We are also looking at our processes, trying to make sure we're providing those decision points as we move projects forward around considering, as Chair Kay said, those most vulnerable. We have first training with Department of Human Resources around equity that our office is helping to put on to continue to evolve our understanding collectively and elevate these priorities in our everyday work. And then just thinking about that as we balance the types of projects that move forward. We know it is the whole society approach. There is no silver bullet. And at the same time, we do have choices with which we put which foot forward. And, for instance, if there's ways that we can help, reduce energy cost for folks, we want to continue to do that. If there's ways that we can help focus on distributed energy and make sure that, that solar penetration that on rooftops that we're fortunate to have is being more widely shared so that more people are really seeing themselves, as beneficiaries and as part of this revolution. So I think, there's many cases we're all trying to do that. I know there's ways we can continue to do better and to do more to link these. And
Thank
Veronica,
you.
Thank
There
you.
is,
Because we're doing quite a lot on equity too, and we've been infusing it into all the programs we're working with, and we learned a lesson from the city. So an example of the state taking a cue from the city, we created a climate ready cohort VISTA program that's a collaboration of DLNR, the Energy Office, the Office of Planning, and Department of Health to focus on infusing equity into our climate discussions and promoting more interdepartmental collaboration on these different climate issues. So I'll stop there, but it's something we're really keen on.
Thank you, Scott. I actually have a very quick question for you, hoping that you'll answer in less than 30 seconds. The question that came in was that you mentioned current PV schedule will use 4 times the land of that huge project. Who is tracking where and how this land is being planned and used and the communities it impacts?
So that's one project that might be 4 times the size of the one I've shown, not all of them. You can go to our website. We have a list of all of the stage 1 and stage 2 renewable energy projects. And we also have a map of where they are. And then these are being tracked there or through Hawaiian Electric's website.
Great, thank you. Okay, one last question for all of our panelists today who did an excellent job. So the question is, if the American Jobs Plan doesn't go through Congress, what is your backup plan? This is in terms of clean energy and climate adaptation, of course. So who would like to start? Rapid, responses.
I think we just need to assume that we need to make every dollar, a dollar that's focused on these shared challenges and not miss an opportunity, whether it's federal funding or our local budgets, and not take any for granted. I'll leave it there.
Great, thanks. Scott.
It'll be a significant challenge. The Energy Office had our budget cut 33% over the last 2 years. And with the fiscal shortfall, almost every department has been impacted in a very hard way. So to get anything out the door, we will need federal support, especially if we're going to keep up the pace that we're trying to achieve.
Sure,
yeah, I'll agree with both of those, and to say, what we have to do is infuse climate action into all of our projects. So whatever the source of funding, whether it's federal, state, local, or private, we just need to have that filter on so that we're always trying to move this initiative forward.
Great, thank you. Okay, so with that, I would like to thank all of our excellent panelists for being here today. In terms of next steps, it's not letting me advance forward. In terms of next steps, I would like to offer that we have a survey that Naoki, if you can please put it in the chat, that would be great. We would like to have your feedback on how we did today and how we can improve. Also, please keep an eye out for an email that will have information on today's recording and the presentations and how to access that. And also, please stay tuned for our next webinar. We will be announcing that over email as well as through various of our partners. So thank you all so very much for being with us today. And mahalo to Senator Brian Schatz and our 3 excellent panelists. We appreciate your time and your collaboration, of course, your knowledge and expertise. So with that, I thank everyone, and until next time, goodbye.